As we get more people on board, I think I'll just introduce you to the speakers and the flow of today's event. So today is the last of the 3-part series of this DeFi webinar. In the first part, we talked about the introduction to DeFi, what's there to expect, the different risks, and what is DeFi in the first place. In the second webinar, we had a little bit more of a Q&A. We had different people introducing the different aspects of DeFi. And oh, you have issues with the video quality? Is this HD? Hi, Nate.
Hey.
Okay, better now.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Let me share my camera too.
Yes, so in this last webinar, we're going to start off with a panel to talk about AMA on AMMs. And then we're going to have 2 other introductions to different kind of things in the DeFi space. So one will be on how DeFi is eating up traditional finance, and the second one will be on the other layer 1 protocols, which is Cardano, that could be another alternative for where DeFi can be built upon. So today we have with us Nate Hindman from Bancor, and Nate is the head of growth at Bancor Protocol. He first stumbled upon AMMs on Ethereum in 2017 and has been hooked ever since. Then we also have Fernando Martinelli from Balancer. And Fernando is an engineer with masters in robotics and image processing. He also did an MBA in Paris. And before creating Balancer Protocol, he founded a few startups and worked as a consultant for Bain and Company in Germany. We also have Michael, but from Curve, but I think Michael is slightly busy. So we'll just start first. And then if Michael is coming on board, then he will just jump on board. So I think before we get started, maybe Nate, do you want to introduce yourself first and introduce what Bancor does? And then Fernando, you can introduce yourself and introduce what Balancer does.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So I've been with Bancor for about 3 years. Before that, I was a financial journalist for some time, and then also built some mobile startups, and eventually stumbled on Bancor in about 2017, kind of just randomly while I was trading tokens on Ethereum, and found out that they didn't have any order books and was pretty interested by that, didn't really understand what was going on. So dug a little deeper and started to kind of learn about this concept of AMMs and liquidity provision from sort of retail token holders. And so, yeah, I've been with the project for a few years. Bancor is based on AMMs. We call it a liquidity protocol. You can build an AMM with any 2 tokens, but our real focus is around building AMMs with BNT. And yeah, that's I think that's pretty much it. The floor is yours.
Fernando, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I think you introduced me quite well. So yeah, I'm Fernando. I've been interested in crypto since 2013. Was very excited when Ethereum came out. I was always kind of first when I understood the importance of Bitcoin and separating state from money and the consequences that could have and will have, I think, in the future. I realized the importance of stablecoins in order for crypto to get mass adoption, and the need for smart contracts in order for that to be possible. And I got involved with the MakerDao community very early on, and later on came up with the idea early 2018 about Balancer. I was kind of following all the discussions around AMMs, Vitalik, and Alan Liu. That was like back in 2016 and 17. When also Bancor was around. So I had this idea of a way to create liquidity pools with 2 or more tokens, where you get to choose different weights. So you can have kind of an index fund where that liquidity pool self-balances the amount of tokens it holds in order to make sure that the percentage in value that each of those tokens have in the pool remains constant, which is an index fund, right? So that's kind of how Balancer was born, and then it turned out that it can be used for a lot more things. And yeah, I'm very excited to share some of those here today and discuss with you guys some of the implications of that as well.
Awesome. So because this is an introduction, a little bit more introduction to DeFi, and in general, people usually either don't own DeFi tokens yet, or just owning very traditional Bitcoin or Ethereum. So can you give an introduction to what is AMM? We talk a lot about AMMs, and AMM is so revolutionary in DeFi. Everyone is talking about AMMs, but what is that even? So if one of you can say like what AMM is how AMM is being used in your protocols, because you guys have very different protocols.
Yeah, well, I don't know if our protocols are that different. I think the sort of use case is you have a smart contract that holds an amount of usually one or more tokens, and these on-chain reserves are used to algorithmically buy and sell as opposed to using an order book. And the folks who stake their tokens inside these contracts are able to generate a fee from each trade that passes through the contract. And everything is kind of fully transparent, fully on-chain. And I guess the real innovation of AMMs is that previously, in order to be a market maker, to provide your liquidity in order to facilitate on-chain conversions or any trades, even in the old traditional financial world, you really needed a high level of a technical capacity. There was a high technical barrier and high capital barrier to acting as a market maker and providing your assets for asset exchange. And the real innovation of AMMs is that anyone can act as a market maker. And I think the original kind of promise of AMMs is that you have tokens sitting in your wallet. Why not just put them in an AMM that provides liquidity, meaning it makes it cheaper to trade in and out of the token you're providing liquidity to, and you can also generate a fee based off of those trades. So this idea of sort of democratizing and reducing capital and technical barriers to liquidity provision, I think is really the sort of key innovation. And now I think our real goal as AMM designers and builders is to kind of, sort of fix some of the kind of underlying issues that I think AMMs receive a lot of criticism for. The explosion in AMMs, I think, is really attributed to this use case of anyone being able to be a liquidity provider. But how do we make that sort of more sustainable and ensure that there's sort of less risk for people who do want to act as liquidity providers? So, and feel free to add to that, because you guys know just as well as I do. I think we're all sort of experts in this field. So yeah, I hope you'll chime in too.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nate. I think the coolest thing about AMMs is the inclusiveness, the fact that it democratizes access to anyone being a market maker. So you like in traditional finance, you have those specialized prop trading companies in Chicago who kind of build those crazy fiber cables that are like a couple milliseconds faster than the other companies, and they win the race, or they make a lot more money because of that. And now going into crypto, everything is trustless, and you have smart contracts, so you don't need all those intermediaries, and that it makes it possible for anyone to buy and sell directly without a clearing house, which is Ethereum itself. So instead of like you having to have a bot and some infrastructure that's 24/7 online to make sure that your orders, and I'm talking about the other option of order-based books or order book-based exchanges, you have to have like some infrastructure to make sure that you're not selling too cheap or buying too expensive, and that requires infrastructure, and it is expensive, and per se it's kind of excluding the masses from participating. And there are some companies working on that as well, which I like Hummingbot. I don't know if you know, but they're kind of working to make sure that market making for order book based exchanges is also possible, and indexes as well, which is pretty cool. Like the AMM solution is more like how can we make sure that this is algorithmically solved, and you're always selling at the right price and buying at the right price. And I really think that it's shown the market product market fit. Hey, Michael, it has shown that it has a lot of product market fit. With all the success that AMMs have been seeing lately.
Awesome. So right now we have Michael joining us, and Michael is the founder of Curve. Before Curve, Michael founded New Cypher, and he did a PhD in experimental physics. So Michael, right now we're just talking about what is AMM and why AMMs are so revolutionary. So for those of you who have just joined us, just a quick introduction to what AMM is. As what both Nate and Fernando has mentioned, traditionally with all these other ways to do trade, you have order books. So if I want to sell something, then I'll go to the order book and write, I've got 10 apples for sale. And if someone wants to buy apples, they go to the order book and say, I want to buy 10 apples. And then the order book will be matching all these people and say, okay, you have 10 apples, this person has 10 apples, and I'll match you together. So this is quite inefficient because you have to wait for someone to have 10 apples before you can buy 10 apples. Right now, what we're doing with AMMs is that we're linking all these apples and money together, so these variables together with math. And so you could always constantly trade. And that's why AMMs are so big, because AMMs has this thing called constant liquidity, because you can always be trading, because the machines will always be providing, or the smart contract will always be providing liquidity for you to trade. So how is Curve, Michael, how is Curve different from stuff like Bancor, stuff like Balancer, stuff like Uniswap? Michael, could you hear? Okay, Michael can't hear. Okay, so with Bancor and Balancer, a big difference is that Bancor does a lot of pair-to-pair trade, and Balancer is more of like a portfolio management where you could have all the different kind of assets you want. It's almost like you can be a manager, a fund manager, and you put the kind of assets you want into your little fund, and you can have the different kind of weightage you want. So why is it just 8 assets? Why not more? Why not less for Balancer?
Yeah, so we've been quite conservative in terms of limits. That's an arbitrary number. It could have been 10 or 7 or 16. The reason why we wanted to limit to a very low number initially is that we didn't know, like, if the 8 tokens are very heavy in terms of gas costs to move. Some ERC20s are heavier. Then you might end up with a very costly transaction to add liquidity. So if you had like 100 tokens in a pool and each one of them costs 500,000 to add to move, then you would go beyond the limit of a block. So you would never be able to add liquidity. But that is an arbitrary number, and we're very likely increasing that for Balancer V2. So yeah, the maths behind Balancer does not limit any, like, the number of tokens. It's more of a gas kind of cost problem.
And if we're talking inter cross-chain, so different kind of layer 1 protocols, which Bancor has done, how possible is that to be on Balancer? Because with other cross-chain options, the gas fees are so much cheaper and transaction cost is a lot cheaper.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We see Balancer as a platform or layer 1 agnostic. Of course, like, Balancer was born on Ethereum, and we are still focusing 100% on Ethereum. We're a small team, but we're working with a lot of other layers 1 and 2s, actually, not only ones, like Near, like Solana, like Polkadot, and Algorand. We're talking to many different layer 1s. The idea is that as long as you have Balancer deployed to those protocols, your liquidity will be seen as part of the Balancer family. So you still get BAO tokens for in the liquidity mining program. So anyone who provides liquidity on Balancer, because they're participating, they get some BAO tokens every week. In the context of liquidity mining, I can explain more what that is. But yeah, it is that all liquidity is welcome regardless of where it is, and we believe that the market will find the right sweet spots, the right fit. So probably for, like you said, like the small guy who has their little index fund or their portfolio that they want to keep balanced, that person with $1,000, for example, wouldn't be doing a good decision to create a balancer pool on Ethereum today with such high gas prices. That person would be better off on Near or Solana or another layer one with less fees. So yeah, the answer is we're working right now with other teams to make sure that balancer gets deployed to those, and also layer twos.
Sounds good. So you mentioned about the market finding a sweet spot, and that's one of the both benefit and a risk in all these arbitrage trading, is that it's not risk-free if I'm contributing as a liquidity provider. And one of the biggest risks is impermanent loss that everyone is talking about. And some projects claim to have solved it. Some projects are trying to solve it. Some projects are attempting to solve it. How are you guys solving impermanent loss in your different protocols?
So maybe a quick thing, like impermanent loss is the difference between you holding the tokens without selling any and what you would have if you participated in an AMM. That's the definition. So let's say a token tokens A and B are 1-to-1, their price is the same, and then you have both in an AMM and the price of A goes 5x the price of B. So if you are on an AMM, you would be selling necessarily token A, right, as the price goes up. Otherwise, you wouldn't be market making. So to me, and I'm curious to hear what Nate and Michael think, but if you're selling at any price between 1 and 5, you're going to be doing a bad deal if you stop at 5 and then you look back and say, well, I sold some at 3, I sold some at 4. So if you sell any token A or tokens A on the way from 1 to 5x, you necessarily are doing a bad deal. So to me, impermanent loss, and I just kind of proved that it's inherent to market making. So if you want to be market making, if you want to sell, if you want to let people buy token A at price 3, you have to sell it at price 3. So if you end up at price 5, then you necessarily are going to be doing a worse deal than you would have if you had held onto your tokens at price 5.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is this kind of debate in the industry right now, which is impermanent loss solvable? Is it there's some people who on one camp say it's just a natural function of market making. If you want to be a market maker, you will always have to sort of deal with this exposure to risk. And there are teams sort of saying that, we think we've meaningfully improved the situation. We're really attacking this head on. I would say Bancor lands sort of in the camp where that is really attacking the solution. I think the answer is sort of somewhere in the middle of, whether it's solvable. I do recognize that it's a sort of it is a natural part of market making, but the amount that liquidity providers are currently paying to arbitrageurs does feel that it is too high. And I think this is where we can really innovate, is sort of reducing the amount that LPs end up paying to arbitrageurs. I think in the current environment, we're in lots of cases seeing a sort of massive transfer of wealth from LPs to arbitrageurs without a lot of LPs really kind of even knowing the extent of it. And it feels that we're sort of in this kind of compensation stage where we're doing airdrops and protocol incentives and hoping that in addition to the fees that are generated by the AMM are enough to compensate for this risk of impermanent loss. But it does feel like the future and the answer is to develop a model where you are paying less to arbitrageurs than we are currently. And that's really a lot of work that Bancor is doing in our Bancor V2. And we feel we've kind of made significant headway there. But it is a particularly elusive problem to solve, and also an elusive concept to grasp, especially given the level of analytics that a lot of LPs have access to today. A lot of people just see the big, APY 1,000% and are not fully realizing on the way out that perhaps the amount that they lost due to impermanent loss is actually greater than whatever protocol incentives or fees that they earned.
And by the way, does it sound work okay for me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
So, my take on impermanent loss is that it's actually not a loss because it's just an artifact of the strategy. And if someone did a rebalancing strategy, it would do exactly the same. Maybe that's why balancer is called balancer, after all. It rebalances. And if you, of course, you could rebalance not every single time, but you could rebalance from rarely. But then you also just could raise a fee, and this would do kind of the same kind of rebalancing strategy. So it's really an artifact of rebalancing strategy, which both balancer and Uniswap are doing, it's not a loss. That's what the strategy is. Holding assets is probably better anyway, but it kind of rebalances, sort of de-risks it, and it makes market making fees on top of that. So that's not bad. But as for Curve, we definitely theoretically do have the problem of impermanent loss, and it's just actually the assets which we are using, which are stable coins, which make this impermanent loss much less severe, because you just if all of the assets are stable coins, then unless some catastrophic breaking from the peg happens, you are you kind of don't lose anything if you're kind of more in one asset versus the other asset. So in our case, just due to the similarity of assets we are having, there is no impermanent loss practically, but theoretically there is one, of course, because you could imagine potentially, for example, USDT going down and then all the pools going into USDT, so you kind of have this impermanent loss, which is fixed if USDT goes back up. But usually, stablecoins usually sit at the peg, and if they break from the peg, in practice they usually return back. So and as long as that holds, we our impermanent loss kind of fixes itself very quickly. So there is one, but it happens for a short time. But maybe if you are looking at kind of fraction of a percent deviations, you may find good times to deposit in one asset versus the other, and so that's kind of how you can play around the impermanent loss.
Well, I think I would agree that impermanent loss is kind of a misnomer. I think maybe it's better to view it as more of a cost of providing liquidity and a cost that is paid to arbitrageurs. I think from our view is that we can reduce the cost that you have to pay to arbitrageurs.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if this cost is paid necessarily to arbitrageurs. It could be, you could think that it's paid to speculators even. So it's just there are because it's not something very short term caused by differences on the market. It's more like when the asset prices are kind of moving over a long time. So
What about the function of oracles? Because oracles provide the price information just like how arbitrage traders would, just that arbitrage traders would be doing the physical movement. But oracles give you the end goal of what the prices should be. And can you not just change your formulas dynamically based on what the oracles are giving you in terms of the input of price information?
So the challenge with oracles is effectively there will be a market to arbitrage against that. Like there is no kind of sole source of truth for price. So you could design your price function that is getting fed by an oracle, but then there will be another external market where an arbitrager could get in faster than the oracle can potentially update. So that's something to kind of consider when experimenting with oracles. And there's definitely a lot of room for innovation with the use of oracles using layer 2 solutions. So I think that's something to definitely kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, and even like with oracles, like that's actually a very, very good problem you are saying, that oracles will, at least especially on Ethereum, they will seriously be behind the market. And if somebody can front run your AMM, like let's say AMM adjusts the target price, but somebody could trade faster than that and be like in front of that change and basically use for their advantage. And that did happen on Ethereum blockchain. I think there was an instance when Synthetics lost money because they used an oracle, and the oracle was kind of lagging behind the market, and I think there was some drastic price movement which caused quite a serious loss, and they had to implement fixes for that. I think what they came up with is fee reclamation mechanism, which basically is that you like when you do the trade, you didn't fully settle the trade, and the fee which you get charged actually it actually appears to be like the true fee only after some time, or let's say 2 minutes, when let's say we're fully sure that Ethereum blockchain has the state settled down. And I don't know if like I think with Bancor it should still be like Bancor should be still affected by the same issues in principle. Maybe it could be adjusted by like the size of the fee, but I think something similar to fee reclamation mechanism is needed. I don't know.
Yeah, so rebates is definitely an interesting space to look at. I think it does add some sort of friction, obviously, for the user and for composability.
Breaks a lot of composability, of course.
Yeah, so it can be kind of a nightmare, though. I think traditional finance has implemented something sort of similar in the form of rebates to deal with this issue. Another kind of interesting area to explore is utilizing the pool as a sort of oracle that potentially, based on the volume, can predict the kind of price that we'll get from the oracle, such that the price that the pool is offering is somehow kept very, very close to the oracle price that it's getting. Bancor's, since we are just so focused on this issue of impermanent loss and have been experimenting a lot in our V2 with oracles, it's been a very interesting sort of experience, kind of deploying those solutions and really, seeing them operate in sort of real world markets, and really understanding just how efficient the arbitragers are in these markets.
They are.
I think
even before Curve, I experimented with something very, very similar to what Bancor is doing now, but in a trading bot setting. And although it wasn't L2, but the speed was comparable to L2. So it was kind of exactly the same, using one market as an oracle, placing orders on another market in a way very similar to bonding curves, basically concentrating liquidity around the target price. And yeah, it was working really well, but only until arbitrage traders started basically putting orders faster than me, and then basically either I was front running everyone or somebody else was front running me, and really that the fastest one wins. And I think it could be that AMM working like that could have the same kind of issue.
Yep. I think it's kind of a sort of, I guess, unspoken thing in the industry that the, I guess, vast majority currently of volume on AMMs does seem to come from arbitragers and sophisticated arbitragers. And this is kind of what I'm referring to about this sort of transfer of wealth that we really have to be careful about from liquidity providers to arbitragers, because it's, it's actually not only from the liquidity providers, but it's from the protocols that are dropping incentives on these AMMs, because you're kind of drawing users into a situation in which you're kind of creating a gold mine for sophisticated arbs. So right. It's definitely something that we need to innovate on. And I would say that kind of in the efforts that, or the early phases of Bancor V2 and our utilization of oracles, we did sort of stumble on somewhat of an epiphany. Unfortunately, I can't really talk about it, but within the next few weeks, we'll be releasing an updated design. We're calling it V2.1 that we're pretty excited about. We do think does reduce the cost that LPs are paying to arbitragers and does so effectively. So we're pretty excited to kind of get that out.
Yeah.
But it's been an interesting journey to say the least.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the design of Uniswap, which is basically based on Uniswap, but focuses on exactly that issue of how much LPs pay to arbitragers. And basically, if somebody does a huge trade on the traditional AMM like Balancer or Uniswap, arbitragers immediately trade it back, and because you have this price shift between different exchanges created for a short time, basically they how to say, probably increase the spread immediately after the trade happens. So, and then the spread slowly shrinks, so that arbitragers have, basically arbitragers don't make as much money, and LPs do. But theoretically, in practice, I don't know if it has proven to be as effective as one would hope, but that all requires an experiment. And
I guess the tough part there is you have to make the price sort of low enough where it's attractive to traders, but high enough that you're not paying so much to ARB. So it's constantly this sort of balance that we definitely found where, we were thinking, well, with a dynamic fee, you could potentially replenish the deficit, but then if the fee is so high, the market has so many options to trade against that your pool just won't get traded against.
And if you have really packed reserve, then making the fee really small would be quite dangerous. So
exactly.
Yeah, so it's a really tricky balance, and especially it needs to be tested at a very abrupt market movement. So
actually, this kind of gets me thinking, this whole idea of AMMs. I noticed that a lot of people who are super interested in AMMs, like yourself, Michael, come from a sort of physics background.
Yeah.
It does feel like I'm always curious to ask them why that is. It does feel like it's a complex system. There's so many kind of different inputs and participants that perhaps the sort of grain of a...
Yeah, I think what it really seems to me is that the many AMMs, like ours, Balancer, Uniswap, they are based on kind of invariant kind of system. And that feels very much like theoretical mechanics or maybe quantum physics, where you have, let's say, a Hamiltonian, which let's say means an energy of the system, or you have some other sort of invariant which doesn't change, and then you work out everything out of the invariant. And this is kind of very similar to how it happens when designing AMMs, but instead of having some law which was written for you, you write a new law. You write a new law of physics but for money, right? And then you kind of derive everything out of that. So that's kind of that's a little bit of a similarity here.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I think the invariant formula is very interesting because it looks at how energy changes from like energy 1 to energy 2, but the total energy introduced or consumed is always the same, which is exactly what AMM does. Because no matter how much of tokens you change from A to B, the total tokens will always be the same.
Yeah,
so you can apply first principles from physics to new applications, which is like super cool.
So it's like either total coins, or it could be total something, total like...
Yeah, it doesn't have to be money.
Yeah, just a total function of some function of money or whatever. Yeah, so it's very, very similar to derivation of laws of physics, but you know, from the laws you create for tokens.
So talking about risks, one of the new thing in the Yearn protocol is this thing called stable credit. So you just have one-sided, once one of the token is, you know, pretty stable and pegged, and the other of the token, the other pairing, is exposed to token price volatility. What are your thoughts on that? Because right now with AMMs, like for Curve, it's different because for Curve it's all the same, pretty much the same pegged price. But for the rest of the other AMMs and other protocols, it's two tokens that are quite volatile. And also the tokens are correlated. So when one drops, the other also drops. And then you have just massive swing in volatilities in both of the tokens. So you have arbitrage traders for both tokens. With Yearn's, you know, stable credit thing, it reduces the exposure to volatility and only exposes just one of the asset. What do you think about that?
It's definitely something that's very interrelated to impermanent loss. The idea of, I just want to put my tokens in there. I want to be exposed to the price movements as though I had them in my wallet. And if you have no impermanent loss or a little impermanent loss, you can maintain your sort of single asset exposure. And this is definitely something that Bancor is working on. I would challenge what you said about having a stable coin on one side of the pair and having a volatile asset on one side of the pair. I don't think it's proven that will decrease impermanent loss. I think in some case it could actually increase it, because when, you know, impermanent loss really has to do with the sort of divergence between the prices of the asset, or the sort of based on the ratio when you enter. So typically, if your tokens are kind of two volatile assets and they're somewhat moving with each other, sort of a lot of assets tend to move with the market, there'll be less divergence. However, if you have a stable asset on one side, there'll potentially be kind of more divergence. So you mean that you know, two cryptos could be correlated to each other, and crypto versus fiat could be not, and you can have more divergence from there, right? Right. And so what potentially could happen is you actually would have more impermanent loss and have to be you know, minting and burning this, or minting far more of the stable coin to cover that impermanent loss. And this could lead to the stable coin often being quite off its peg. And so I think there are some, it's certainly an interesting model, and, you know, speaking to the sort of demand in the market for this single asset exposure. But I do have, or it will be interesting to see kind of the extent to which the stable coin being minted can stick to its peg, and whether those pools potentially do create more impermanent loss than having two volatile assets in the pool.
Fernando, do you have anything you want to add? Because you've been quite quiet.
Oh, you're on mute.
Do you have anything you want to add?
No, actually not. I'm quite enjoying the conversation.
Okay, that's great. So moving on to, so impermanent loss, I would say it's something that's a bit more external. You're not a trader, you just have your assets in there, and that's a loss that you just have, that just exists because you are part of the market maker. But what about the different risks when you are a trader? So you have price slippage as one of the risks. How do you guys deal with that in your different protocols?
Yeah, I guess I can probably start. So basically what the price slippage is the primary thing we're focusing on, and we concentrate liquidity around the target price, which is 1.0 for stable coins, obviously, when they're traded between each other. And kind of predictability of this target price allows to do that. And when you concentrate liquidity, then the slippage becomes much, much less. So basically, on Curve, slippage is less by a factor of 100, and if not more than on Uniswap or on Balancer, but for stable coins only, obviously.
Fernando, do you want to, or do you want to jump in?
Go ahead.
Yeah, my answer is just kind of simplistic, which is that Curve definitely brought a very interesting innovation when you can keep both assets stable and when you're dealing just with stable coins. I think from our perspective, and for anyone who doesn't know, the slippage that a trader faces when trading against an AMM is a function of the amount of liquidity that is in its reserves. So it's really the pools that generate the most liquidity typically will offer the best prices. And so I think from our perspective, we are just focused on, as much as we can, nailing the experience for liquidity providers in terms of minimizing risk and minimizing friction of having to expose themselves to multiple assets when acting as the market maker. And in turn, that we hope that will attract enough liquidity to offer prices that are competitive enough in the market. But we really think of it from a liquidity provider first situation where, if you have the liquidity, I guess liquidity is sort of king, then you'll be able to offer the sort of best trader experience.
Maybe adding on to that, it's an analogy I like to make about how fees are kind of today on AMMs. Like I like to see like Uniswap's simplicity, and it's always a trade-off, but it has a fixed 0.3 fee. Balancer allows anyone to say like my fee will be 0.1 or it would be 2%. So it's like it gives you already some flexibility to find a better product market fit with the liquidity you have. For example, and Michael's curve shows that for stablecoins or stablecoin pairs or pegged assets, you don't need such high fees. So I like to see like Uniswap as like taxis with a fixed price. And then I like to see Balancer shared pools like taxis that can choose whatever their kilometer fee will be, but that's fixed as well. And now you have smart pools, Balancer smart pools, which will change the fee dynamically. So when there's more demand for liquidity, the fees are increased. When there's less demand, the fees are decreased. And there's some method you can mathematically prove that that's the ideal fees, right? It's a function of volatility to the power 2, so squared. And that's like the analogy to me is like Uber. Like whenever it's raining and a lot of people want to take the taxi or the Uber, and there's not enough people driving, then the price increases and more people, more drivers go to the street working for Uber, and then you meet demand and supply. And why is that the same for liquidity pools that have surge pricing or dynamic fees? Because when you increase the fee, let's say Black Thursday, everyone wants to trade. They want to save their CDPs, their vaults, because ETH's price is crashing. They don't care if they're paying like 1% or 2% or 0.3%. They just want to trade at that price because they know that in 1 hour, the price will be half. So you can increase the fees there, and which in turn makes that pool more profitable, right? Because if you double the fees or triple the fees, it will be 3 times more profitable. And that in turn attracts liquidity, and that makes the slippage lower, right? So that's why I'm talking about.
Yeah, well, actually,
liquidity, it makes the slippage lower, and that makes it better for traders because the slippage is lower, and then it's like a virtual circle.
Yeah, I guess actually maybe the fee is not even quite the most correct name for traders, because like probably it is spread really, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah,
that brings the analogy.
But it's important for LPs, Michael, because for traders, slippage and fees are the same, right? They don't care. They just know that the spot price is that, and I'm paying more than that. But for the LPs, that makes a whole world of difference, because if people are trading back and forth and it's just the slippage and 0 fees, that function is not accumulating value, the value function, or whatever, right? But if the spread is high because of the 2% fee and people are trading a lot back and forth, those LPs will make a lot of money.
Yeah, most definitely.
LPs,
but if the fee, right. But if the fee is too high, so imagine the fee being, I don't know, 50%, nobody would trade there. So there is some optimum depending on volatility, so which is could change indeed with market conditions. But I think the question was more about slippage, which is slightly different from fees, because like slippage defines how much you can trade, and I think you can probably add something about slippage when you have non-50-50 ratios in the pool. Like for example, when Wi-Fi was introduced, the Wi-Fi token, it was typically working with 98%, 2% pools, where where I think the slippage is much lower.
It's much higher.
It depends on what direction.
Higher, yeah.
Oh, which direction? I guess
much faster. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if you try to, let's say if you have 98% US dollar, 2% Wi-Fi, if you try to buy Wi-Fi, maybe the slippage is much higher, but it's much lower than
the same. It's the same in both directions. Yeah, it's a bit counterintuitive, but it is the same in both directions.
You're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah. But of course, then it changes just after like that initial delta. It changes, but if you take just the derivative, it's going to be the same for both sides. Yeah. I agree with you, Michael. The only reason why I mentioned that is that Nate mentioned that, and correctly, in my opinion, that what makes slippage better is the more liquidity in the pool, and for that to happen, that pool has to be attractive for liquidity providers, right? If it's a pool that's profitable, attractive, more people will join and put liquidity, and the slippage will go down. What I'm saying is that dynamic fees is a very good way to attract more liquidity to reduce slippage. So that
is dynamic fee like done uniformly throughout all the different pools in Balancer? Because you could have like a ETH DAI pool versus ETH USDT pool versus ETH REP BTC pool, and if they're all different prices, and I want to just trade ETH, how do they determine which is the best pool to trade with?
We have something called a smart order router, which does the best trade for you, including it also considers the gas fees that you're going to pay.
And the dynamic fees that you mentioned due to price surges.
Yes, everything is included. But the dynamic fees are actually something new. It's what we call smart pools. So for Balancer, we have 2 types of pools natively: shared pools and private pools. Shared pools are like Uniswaps. They're immutable, fixed, so the trading fee doesn't change, but anyone can put liquidity. and there's the private pools where only the owner, the creator of the pool, can put liquidity. But on the flip side, they're totally flexible. So people can, the owner can add tokens, change the trading fee, do whatever they want. And the smart pools are actually a mix of like a hybrid. It's actually a private pool controlled by a smart contract. So the owner of the private pool is not you or Nate or Michael. It's a contract. And that contract works as a gateway for external liquidity to be added to that private pool. So people send their liquidity to that controller. The controller mints ERC20s, saying, okay, now you own 50% of that pool that I own, and then sends down the liquidity. But since it's a private pool, that controller can do some stuff to change that pool. And an example where, like for surge pricing pools, it can only change the trading fee. So it has some logic where it sees volatility increasing, it increases the fee. Volatility goes down, it decreases the fee. And that's kind of the Uber I mentioned. So if there's less demand, price goes down. If there's more demand, price goes up.
Awesome. So let's go to the questions by the people on the floor. So Curve Balancer and Bancor are all early projects. What do you guys feel about the way the space has evolved? Are you guys disappointed by the events that has developed in recent times? Oh, Michael left.
No, I'm not disappointed. I think yield farming is an amazing innovation, an incredible growth hack, an incredible way to distribute ownership of your protocol. What I do think is somewhat of an issue, and I said this before, is that yield farming sort of masks the issue of impermanent loss, that we're trying to compensate LPs because it's sort of, you can lose a lot of money and exposed to a lot of risk. And the amount of sort of yield farming, the focus on yield farming has sort of turned AMMs into sort of a hot money game where whales are kind of, or just any users trying to jump in and out of the pools and in and out of different pools and different protocols in enough time to extract enough yield farming or protocol incentives in order to make up for the money that they're losing to impermanent loss or the cost to arbitragers. So I think this somewhat undermines the whole idea of AMMs, which is that it should be something for retail traders where they don't have to constantly monitor it. They don't have to, have access to, tools to constantly come in and out of pools in order to make up for impermanent loss. So it's almost like in the past 3 months, we figured out how to sort of like hold or point a hose at an AMM and spray it down with a lot of liquidity, but we haven't figured out how to deal with the leakage of it and the sort of underlying issues. And I think in order to have protocol incentives sort of be sustainable and really have them pay off for retail users and users in general, because I think a lot of people are either token holders or either not participating in yield farming or just getting burnt out because they have to wake up every morning and that APR was 1,000% and now it's like very little, and I pulled my tokens out and the token mooned and now I have less. So it's like they're getting a little burnt out on constantly monitoring their LP stakes. So I think once we can come up with a more viable solution to the leakage issue, it makes the sort of yield farming a little more sustainable.
Yeah, I guess probably what would be great to mention here is, like, before this yield farming mania, there was already yield farming happening. And I think it was happening with synthetics on curve pools, and I think it was sustainable. So the thing was that synthetics ecosystem needed a good way to enter and exit out of it. And before Curve, they've been mostly using Ethereum pool on Uniswap, incentivized by SNX tokens. And on Curve, the market making function is much more effective, and basically they've incentivized SUSD pool on Curve, and it was providing a great value for them, and at the same time it was subsidized by SNX tokens, and I think it was consistently giving about, I don't know, maybe 20-30% APY in total, which was quite stable. I think the reason is that the value for synthetics ecosystem was pretty large, and this value was independent of well, it wasn't just like some some coin which is just printed and used for governance, and that's it, right? So it was connected to the economics of synthetics ecosystem, and it appreciated in value when the whole ecosystem benefited, and so it was working like in a really sustainable way, I should say. And of course, like with this, when the hype happens, and there are kind of like in this hypey environment, the yield farming can give 1000% APY or something, but that doesn't last. And I think sustainable yield farming is possible, even though it is paid by subsidies. There should be some value which is created. So it's basically transferring value from one place to another. So transferring value from where it is created, which could be completely independent, to, let's say, the AMM or whatever benefits creation of that value.
So then, Michael, are you suggesting then that it was, or assuming that model is sort of sustainable, are you suggesting that it can be replicated across numerous projects such that they create a synthetic version of their token that is stable to its AMM pair?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is that if some project benefits from good liquidity, right, and if the value that project produces is different from the value produced by actually provided that liquidity, then you could it could some very sustainable yield farming could be constructed.
But they would in your model, if they don't have a stable version or synthetic version of their token that they're asking users to provide, then the LPs still would be exposed to a cost.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that, like, if it was some not necessarily stable token benefiting from liquidity, then some sustainable yield farming could be possible there, although with some impermanent loss maybe. So that's that's quite possible.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that in principle, if one project provides one sort of value, another project produces another sort of value and benefits from that value, they can provide subsidies, and then they get like more benefits, and you have kind of this mutually beneficial relationship between two projects and moderated by the token flow.
It seems like most of the tokens that all the native tokens that are being given out as the form of subsidies that you mentioned, the only function that there is the governance function. What can be the other expected use cases and value add, economic value add that these tokens can bring?
Yeah, well, of course, we actually had some good governance proposals which we are to implement, which is connecting the value generated in the system in a form of fees to the value of the token. That's one thing.
It's a bit like the sushi swap model. As in part of, so like 0.3% is the total fees, but of which 0.25% goes to the liquidity providers and 0.05% goes to token holders.
Kind of like that. And there could be different ways how it goes to token holders. Could go to all token holders, could go to only token holders who participate in governance, could be some sort of hybrid. But yeah, That's one way. And another way is that actually governance itself, depending on how it's constructed, it could potentially bring value. So if you just vote on boring proposals, that probably wouldn't really bring much value to the token. But if you have, let's say, multiple competing parties trying to pull the system in their favor using the tokens, maybe that can create some market competition between them and value for the token. But that's at the moment, this is a little bit hypothetical, so it's not yet observed.
Actually, that's something I'm quite worried about, because if we look at who are these traders, they're usually whales, or soon I think we'll have more different pools where you pool all the governance tokens together or governance powers together to start voting. Then it's not any different from traditional finance that we have today, where all the ETFs and all these voting powers and governance are given to these big asset manager companies or asset management companies, and they're voting on behalf of everyone. So at the end of the day, everything that we're doing is not about decentralizing power. At the end of the day, it still goes back to power being consolidated, being coordinated by specific parties in the system. And we don't solve any decentralized problems at all. We just go back to the old system in a more efficient manner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's quite possible, because like it's people are not so much interested in participating in governance unless they have really strong opinions, and the voices of them will be maybe they will prefer to delegate their powers to someone else. Well, maybe delegation explicitly allowed, if explicitly allowed, will be probably a good solution to that, because if delegation is not explicitly allowed, then there will be money managers who try to pool the tokens, and then they vote on behalf of people, and maybe people would have chosen somebody else to express their voice than asset managers who manage the monetary value. So maybe the delegation could actually be a solution, but then it kind of shifts more like towards. So like in like a financial system, you give assets to some asset management company and they vote on your behalf. But here it could be probably a little bit more like a political system where you give a vote to, I don't know, some representative who represents your vote, and they maybe don't manage your money, but so that's probably good. But then it kind of comes down to some PR and whatever for those token politicians to be chosen, but then they should see some value for themselves to be chosen. And I don't know what it turns out into after all. But yeah, that's definitely.
I think an area that's ripe for innovation in terms of counteracting consolidation of power is, I think we can really use time more effectively, such that if you are agreeing to be a service provider in the protocol for a certain amount of time, if you've had your liquidity locked in a certain amount of time, you're sort of accruing accruing voting power somehow. So that is, I think, a tool at our disposal to use time to counteract the powers that you can get just from pure wealth, right?
Yeah, and that's very interesting that you brought time in, because like on Curve, we also thought to use time, but we thought about locking liquidity, but actually decided to not do that, because if there is some problem with the protocol, then you would need to be able to unlock liquidity, and like unlocking, like if it's locked and there is a vulnerability and you cannot unlock, you may be looking at a disaster. So we
a good alternative will be like quadratic voting, but instead of the amount of tokens that is being done in the quadratic version is weighted like with time, so your time will be quadratic ish.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
so maybe Michael, your tokens or the principal is not locked, but your reward at the end of the tunnel is locked.
Yeah, we're not locking the reward, but we are we're having some functions which the governance token has apart from governance, which is boosting the production of governance token pretty much, and also accruing the the fees are distributed to those who lock the governance token, and the weight which you get in voting is proportional to the lock time. So, the longer you lock, the higher voting power you have, and basically it comes down to people who have a long-term vested interest in the platform. They are the ones who have the highest voting power, and so far it looks like really working.
It looked what?
It looks like it works, but maybe it's a little bit early to say, but at least I did see some instances of short-term speculators having one opinion and long-term token holders having another opinion, and basically turning vote into their favor, whereas with speculators with just one token, one vote, it would turn to be different.
As we're rolling out governance on our end, it's important for us that in order to, generate, and I think this might be the same in Curve, in order to generate the governance token, you must be a user of the system, right? So you must use your pool tokens to generate the governance token actually in our upcoming model. So really aligning and ensuring that your LPs are the governance token holders and participants, I think, is quite key in those dynamics.
Right.
For Balancer?
Yeah, so our stance on about governance is that it's a very hard problem to solve, and we want to focus on what our core is. So we're really thinking a lot about governance, but we don't want to rush too fast, too soon into full on-chain governance like MakerDao did, which in my opinion slowed them down a little bit. So I think we're taking a more conservative approach towards governance, and we actually created Snapshots, and it's a tool that a lot of people are using. So I think even though we're conservative, we're kind of contributing a lot to the space. So that idea of not going on chain is what, and also the high gas prices is what motivated us to create Snapshot. So you can vote just by signing with your private key without spending any ETH. And really a lot of people are using that. And now we're talking to Aragon to maybe see kind of how the results of Snapshot gasless votes can be programmatically or automatically trustlessly implemented on chain. So it's pretty exciting, but it's really not our focus, and we try to keep like 100% focus on our AMM goals. Yeah.
So you're taking the Snapshot voting rights and turning them into the actual voting, like the actual.
Yeah. So today we do that. So today we do that pretty much with a multi-sig that the company holds, and we of course will get to a decentralized stage where there's going to be a DAO, and there's going to be like spells like how MakerDao works, and code is proposed, and then that code gets automatically implemented or cast, like Maker calls it. But today it's semi-decentralized. Like there's a vote without using any gas, so it's really signal voting or carbon voting, and that gets implemented by the multi-sig.
Oh, that's interesting, because I was thinking that first vote is just a testing vote to get, for me as an individual, to get an understanding of what the community is. And then the proper vote is where I aggregate the information that I receive from the entire community, and then I can change my vote to be either more aligned or misaligned with the community.
So there's two, so there's proposals and there's votes. So we are still kind of working out how much quorum you need for a proposal to become a real actual vote. And if you look at Polkadot's governance, I think it's a very nice example. And what a lot of projects are doing. So there's like those two stages. Anyone can make a proposal, and that proposal gets kind of promoted to a vote. And then I think that's what you're saying. So yeah, that only confirms what I'm saying, that governance is very hard. And we're not governance specialists, or it's not our core business like it is for Aragon, for example. So we're partnering with them to make sure that Snapshot gets this kind of extra functionality of implementing decisions on chain. Yeah.
Okay.
Guys, I have to go now. It's been amazing. I don't know if you want to stay. That's fine. Don't.
10 more minutes.
Yeah. So I planned for 45 minutes. So I've already went up. So really nice seeing you guys.
For joining us.
Thank you. Bye, Nate.
Bye.
Bye, Michael. Great seeing you guys again. Take care. Bye.
So I have one last question for you guys. It's that if you have one advice you could give to people building AMMs today, what would it be?
Wow. Michael, or should I go first?
Yeah, I guess I would advise to maybe not clone existing projects, because this doesn't bring too much value, but to bring something new. So like, I mean, it's possible to clone, but I think it would be much better to see something substantially new, and I think then new AMMs have a high chance to succeed.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with that. I'm continually shocked by all these new. It's like there's a new swap every day paired with a different name of a food.
Oh yeah, barbecue swap.
What's that?
It reminds me the altcoins in 2014. There was even something called barbecue coin. So similar.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you choose to do that, it's really a short-term thing where your AMM is more likely to just kind of be forgotten. If you're just kind of changing something about the tokenomics or the token distribution, or even with like generation of fees, this is kind of off topic, but I'll be curious to see with governance tokens when you start to turn on fees for like a governance token in some AMM protocols. All of a sudden that means 100% of your fees are no longer going to your LPs. So they're going to a treasury that's going to your token holders. So this can kind of cause an effect where, for instance, if Uni were to turn on their protocol fee, what happens to their LPs when they're suddenly making less money?
Right.
And they can go to another AMM protocol where you're making 100% of your fees. So I guess my advice would be similar to Michael's, which is innovate on the underlying structure of the AMMs. Acknowledge that with all the hype and euphoria there is about AMMs right now, there are still some pretty large problems that a lot of them are being masked right now that are not being solved. And if you can come with a good solution, then I think that will be way more impactful than a very interesting, or not particularly, actually not interesting sort of airdrop or protocol incentive model or token distribution. If you could really solve some of these underlying issues of really not paying so much to arbitragers, stuff like that, then I think that's potentially more innovative.
Yeah, and I think like basically the difference here is that like if you fork an existing protocol, you are looking at the same market which this protocol is addressing, and you are trying to compete with it head to head with using its own technology, but in a fork, which is I think it probably could be doomed to fail or to take a really small fraction of that market. So, or maybe some niche which that protocol misses for some reason. But on the other hand, we have foreign exchange market, which is $1 trillion market. We have like stock trading market, which is enormously huge too. And I think although today it all happens in like on like traditional exchanges with order books and everything, I think it is quite possible that AMMs can conquer those markets and have all of that happening in AMMs. And that can be achieved only by like substantially like new something substantially new, because I think existing AMMs cannot serve those markets yet. So there should be something really new over there.
Thank you so much. Do you guys have anything else to add? We actually still have 5 more minutes. Otherwise,
Go ahead. Nothing that immediately comes to mind on our end, but what were you going to say?
Oh, because there are a lot of other more specific questions that we could answer, because I've been asking them in a masked version. Yeah,
okay.
But we could answer specific questions. Oh, this is quite cool. So what tools are there for non-code savvy investors to read a smart contract and discover the pitfalls and dangers?
Oh. Yeah, I mean... Yeah, for non-code savvy users, it's actually, you know, if there were methods to discover those dangers, they probably would have been kind of like if there were dangers, they probably would be caught fairly quickly by other people. So I think the best bet is still humans. Like there are. I don't think there are good ways to catch something which others don't see using automatic user-friendly tools. In fact, auditors, they do use automatic tools in addition to their experience, and then they deliver their reports using both of those. And even that doesn't necessarily cover everything. Sometimes something new comes up which auditors could have missed.
Yeah, I would say that even the tests you can do in sort of like a testing environment before the protocol is on chain are, you hope that they're good, and they will be good, but you'll often learn that the market is so wild right now that there's a lot of stuff you can't simulate before you're in production. So really the best way is to not be reckless when a project first comes out and dump a whole bunch of money in a smart contract based on what they're saying, but to really connect with the community through Telegram or Discord and put in maybe a little bit of money that you can afford to lose, and then talk to the other people and say, what are you seeing? Are you seeing it worth less, more, increased? What type of market conditions are we exploring them in? So even for the folks that and I think Michael's right that a lot of developers can spot these issues early, and it will get surfaced in the Telegram channel and in their community. But a lot of it is also trial and error, and I think it requires a lot of communication from the sort of test bunnies, the test LPs in the first phases when the AMM is rolled out, to really compare notes and understand if what the AMM is actually doing what the protocol designers hoped it would do.
I think another very good way is to look at Nexus Mutual, and for the specific protocol, see how many people are actually staking it. Because the more people staking it, you know that it's less risky, because it's riskless enough or less risky enough for them to stake so much NXM tokens that it's worth trying that protocol, or at least that's a good place to get started.
Right, and really, if this insurance is not fully bought out, it's a good idea to buy one.
True, but make sure you're looking on a long enough time horizon too, right? Because if a protocol announces, hey, we're doing an airdrop or a protocol incentive for the next week, you look over the next week, oh, there's hundreds of millions of liquidity, it must be safe. Then I'm not sure if that's a good measure, even on Nexus. So to keep an eye on that as well, to really understand the incentive design before getting involved and how long that's going to last.
do your research, and ask a lot of questions. Once again, thank you so much, Nate and Michael. Really, really appreciate you being on here and spending time here and having a lot of great chats. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye. All right. Next up, we have Robert Sharratt from CSGO Fin SA. And can I get Robert on board? So by the way, I'm going to answer the questions later in the ask a question part. I'll just add them later after this entire thing. It's Robert here. While waiting for Robert, I'm just going to introduce Robert first. And then while waiting for him, I can answer the other questions. So Robert is the founder of CSGO Fin SA, which offers insured interest-bearing deposit accounts on-chain with higher rates than the bank. The firm is regulated and based in Switzerland and is opening an office in Singapore. So Robert is going to be sharing about how traditional finance is going to lose out to decentralized finance because decentralized finance is a lot more efficient, which is whatever we're talking about here. So I think it's not online yet, but it's okay. Let me answer the questions. So there's one here. How do you guys decide which protocol to work with? I think from what Fernando has said is that every protocol has a specialization, right? It's just like in economics, everyone has a specialization, and then you just specialize in the skill sets that you're good at. Then you partner with other people with the other types of specialization. And I guess that's kind of one of the reasons why Chainlink is so popular, because Chainlink is one of those that does oracles that aggregates different kind of information from different places on-chain and off-chain. So that helps a lot with the specialization and being known from that perspective. Okay, so the question here that has 4 votes, DeFi newbie here, I understand how liquidity providers can earn interest by staking their latent crypto. I don't understand how a borrower makes anything, especially considering that he has over-collateralized his loan by providing more collateral than what he's borrowing. Can someone explain this part? So the reason why I didn't ask this question on board there is because this is for lending and borrowing protocols. What we talked about today was more of AMMs, so more of a decentralized exchange. But how does a borrower get benefits from it? It's very simple, because there isn't a lot of let's say you have DAI tokens and you don't want to be selling your DAI tokens. You have your DAI tokens and you don't want to be selling your DAI tokens to get, I don't know, like compound tokens or balancer tokens. So you want to be lending it and then borrowing your tokens instead. Then it could be cheaper. Plus, you're only going to use it for a while. You're probably going to use it to be doing some liquidity mining or yield farming for 20 days or 1 week, and you don't want to be selling and doing all of that stuff. So, wait, I think Robert is on board. Is he here? Not yet. Okay. Yes, so that is done. Then, so for token holders and investors, about the future expectation of the projects, as you heard just now, Bancor is doing a V2.1 in the next few days. So do watch out for that. Oh wait, Robert is here. So, yes. So I'm just going to get Robert on board, and he can start sharing his stuff. So Robert, once again, Robert will be talking about how decentralized finance will eat up centralized finance. And that's very interesting. And then I'll answer your questions after that. No, this kind of technical issues. Okay, so Robert, you have to accept the invite. Yeah, and then there'll be more Q&A. So just put your questions in Ask a Question segment of everything that you want to know about centralized finance and decentralized finance and everything. Put it in. Yes, so Robert's here. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Lisa, how are you?
Good. Very good.
Great. Super. So I want to share my presentation.
So you go to share screen and you can share your presentation.
Okay, how about this? Can you see it?
Yes, you can see it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. So I'm excited to talk about how DeFi is disrupting traditional finance. As you can guess from my tie, I come from traditional finance myself. And I'm a real believer in DeFi. I think it will completely change the way traditional finance works. So let me take you through a little presentation on how I think DeFi will disrupt CeFi. So the short answer in terms of what is it doing today to disrupt CeFi is not very much. Those of us in the sector, of course, are really enthusiastic about the rapid build out of DeFi, but in the traditional world, it isn't having a huge effect when you look at the numbers. So if you compare it in terms of trillions of dollars of global financial assets, you can see CeFi on the left, which makes up 99.9% of all assets, and the small growth of DeFi. But the growth has been fantastic. And I think what you see, which is even more important, is you see that it's really on the radar screen of a lot of people in CeFi. You see governments talking about it. You see exchanges developing. You see banks, very concerned about a superior technology. So my view is this is where we will be in 10 years. So if you look at it, I think that DeFi will take almost 20%, 1/5 of global financial assets. I think that will be mainly driven by huge numbers of debt and money markets that are tokenized. I think you will see the development of areas that don't exist at the moment, because what currently exists in DeFi, of course, is all the things that is the easiest to do, the lowest hanging fruit on chain. So it's things that are over collateralized. It's it's crypto to crypto. And I think what you will see in terms of an enormous development will be things like bank deposits. I think that a secured, insured bank deposit on chain will arrive. And I think that will completely disrupt the banking market. I think that you will see build out of things like debt products. I think that money markets will be one of the biggest gainers. And so our view is that DeFi will grow almost 250 times from what it is today. But even that, it will be quite small compared to CeFi. And who will lead this DeFi uprising? It's going to be a strange combination, I think. I think it's going to be a combination of savers, because essentially there has been zero yield in the world since the 2008 financial crisis. And these savers essentially are a range of people. There's individuals and institutions. It's as broad as family offices, small private banks here in Switzerland. It's asset managers in the major financial centers. And of course, it's individuals who are looking for yield. And then the other key driver of it, I think, will be people who feel that they've been left out by mainstream finance. So it's people who have a feeling of inequality, people who feel that they're not well served. Essentially, they don't get very much value from CeFi, from traditional finance, people who don't like their banks, which is I've narrowed it down to 99% of people in the world. So the adoption curve, I think you can see on the right. You see the early days where it was essentially the Bitcoiners are, an unbelievable group who've created this structure to make DeFi possible. And it's almost like a bit of a religious movement in the sense that it had its own language, it had its own feeling of group identity. And I think what you're going to see, which I think is great, by the way, but I think what you're going to see over time as it moves into institutional and retail savers is that the importance of the technology and the importance of the original fervent theology will be left behind a little bit, which I think is a good thing. I think it will develop into what are the benefits for me, because that's what people want to hear about when they adopt something, and when you don't, in the early days of the internet, you had all these questions about how packets were transferred online, whether people would use their credit card online. And now people don't even think of that. They just simply watch Netflix, or they buy and they shop on Amazon. They don't think of the underlying technology. And the same thing will evolve over the next decade for DeFi. Savers are going to ask themselves, so these two groups, savers and basically the pissed off 99%, are going to ask, the savers will ask, where did my yield go? And so yield has disappeared essentially in the developed world. Negative rates in Europe, the UK, Japan. Here in Switzerland, you pay 75 basis points a year to have your money in the bank, which is really irritating. And the 99% will say, where did my dreams go? Because if you actually overlay the growing size of the financial sector in most developed economies, it negatively correlates with the decline in middle-class incomes. So if you look at who is capturing a lot of value in developed markets, well, part of it is caused by a shift to globalization, but a large part is captured by the financial sector. And I think many people will argue what the financial sector gives to them and why they should be taking such a large piece of the economy. So looking at where DeFi will also be incredibly important is the broken central bank policy that exists in the world today. And you can see it by when there's it's a misunderstanding essentially of what money is and what banks are. Money is just a symbol. It's a representation of purchasing power. And banks are, active participants in the economy. They take a large part of the economy. They're not simply facilitating matching savings with productive uses. And you can see that by looking at historical crises. So if you look at the tech bust after the year 2000, 2001, you look at the great financial crisis from the year 2008, lots of monetary stimulus, which basically means printing of money, occurred with the idea that that would stimulate the economy. But if you look at it, bank loans did not increase. They decreased after that, because banks act like you and I do. If the future is uncertain and you've made a big bet on the future, which is what they do by making loans, you're much more conservative. You're much less likely to expand your balance sheet and increase productivity in the real economy. And the same thing I think will happen. So our forecast, you can see in the bottom right, is that based on the great financial crisis, that you will see a decline in bank lending. And you see that clearly today. First principles, part of the issue is that we really don't understand money very well. Outside of the crypto community, people don't stop and think about money very much. My own story was interesting. I was a young banker in Russia doing emerging markets, investment banking at the end of the 1990s. And we were making loans to some Russian companies. I worked for a multinational investment bank, and I was very young and working in the Moscow office just for a bit. And, we would make a loan to a company and I would be like, well, where does this money come from? Because in our subsidiary in Russia, we didn't have the money there. And, I remember asking lots of people, does it come from, do we send it from London? Does it get transferred through the Russian central bank? Does somebody show up in a plane with the money? Where does it come from? And, money comes from essentially making loans. So you make a loan to a company and then you create a deposit account and you create credit against it. So The problem with this fractional reserve banking industry is that it's diametrically opposed to the principles of DeFi, the principles of crypto, because essentially it's double spending, which, as you all know, probably in DeFi and in crypto isn't possible. And so by understanding money and banking better, and by essentially DeFi replacing CeFi in many of these things, I think you'll see a more equitable distribution of wealth. And I think you'll see a reduction in the variance of the economic cycles. So, and then, CeFi is predicated essentially on inflation. Why? Because the largest borrowers in the world are CeFi and governments. So inflation is good for them because they have to pay back their money in future money that has less purchasing power, so it's worth less. So inflation is really good if you happen to be a bank or the government, or if you're part of the 1% very close to the centers of power. It's bad for savers, so if you're like the rest of us, if you're a typical middle-class person trying to save for the future, inflation eats away at your savings. And it's particularly bad for the poor, because inflation, people who don't have access to, assets that might increase with inflation, like a house or a stock portfolio, it's incredibly bad for them. So our view of the future in terms of DeFi is that it will be very good for savers, it'll be very good for the poor, it'll be less good for government and banks, because it just like a lot of technology adoption, DeFi is about abundance. The marginal production cost of financial instruments under DeFi is almost zero. It's just like publishing something online. It doesn't cost very much today. So those deflationary factors will be very important in driving the development of DeFi. So in summary, I think it's a 10x better technology. It's 10x better for society. I think that what you'll see is I think that will drive the adoption. I think adoption will be driven by essentially the value that it gives to people and our better human values. And I think there's some things we have to keep in mind in this kind of exuberant early days of DeFi, is that the laws of reality, of finance, don't change if you just put something on chain. Finance is fundamentally about risk and return. So, a food token offering 1,000% APY probably isn't going to replace your average bank account. So, the thing that DeFi really needs for adoption, as I put in my adoption curve earlier, is it needs a better tie to the real economy. Once the ties to the real economy come, bridges to the real economy, bridges between CeFi and DeFi, I think that you will see adoption just explode. So here's how CeFi financing works. Essentially, you sell something, a good or service that somebody else wants to buy. And that comes into the company on the left-hand side, which is the operations. And then on the right-hand side is how essentially CeFi thinks about the claims on the value of the company. So that goes from at the top in debt to the bottom in shares. Investment bankers, being relatively ingenious, have come up with a whole bunch of different categories for how a firm should be financed. But if you look on this next slide, here's how DeFi finances companies. You have the same idea, you sell something, you get in some cash from, essentially everything comes from the invoice, everything comes from the contract. But then after that, you can just have you can think of it in digital terms, not analog terms, not the arbitrary categories that were created essentially by, financial institutions. You can finance, as I've got here, from A to Z. It can be granular, divisible, borderless. You can finance from the first dollar or Bitcoin that comes into a company to the last one. And it just simply goes from the lowest risk to the highest risk. And that can be priced in a very different way, which I'll get to when we talk about tokenization. So here's my disruption checklist for DeFi. It has to have a benefit to a user. Here in Switzerland, for example, you are a regulated company, and we offer insured deposit accounts on chain. We offer 3% in US dollars, which we're also developing in stable coins. And it's insured. It's completely insured through the Lloyd's market in London. So, the benefit to a user, whether you're a traditional guy or whether you're a crypto guy, is risk and return. So you get the same risk as a bank, but you get a much higher return. And it's insured. And it's only possible by using blockchain technology. So we need to focus much more, I think, on what are the really simple benefits to end users. And then there's human psychology, which we often leave out because we're so tech focused. But people, it's their money. So there's an instinctual concern about where you put your money. And, we need to address the psychology of it, which is people need to feel that their money is safe and is looked after. And I think that even though, we may not all perfectly love it, I think that will lead to an increased need for regulation, whether it's self-regulation, something we start to do ourselves, or whether it's imposed by some government. Then it needs to be user-friendly. It needs to be tied to the real economy. It needs to be integrated with, traditional finance. There needs to be an easy bridge. And then, it needs to offer a very clear solution. Disruption is inevitable.
Robert, so I do have to pause you for here. Robert, sorry.
Yes?
Talking about disruption, I have to disrupt your presentation for a bit because we're running out of time. And is it okay if you can do 1 minute of quick run through and then answer one question?
Yes, for sure. I'm happy to do that.
So could you summarize in 1 minute and then, one question?
Sure. So I would say that tokenization is something that will inevitably lead to disruption of the centralized finance. And that is simply because it offers a better risk return possibility for investors, for users, and it's a much more efficient system. So I could put my slides available and people can look at them afterwards if they want.
Yeah, that would be great.
Good.
Yeah. So the question is, you seem to have a view that crypto and USD will decouple. Is that right? And when do you think that will happen?
Yes, I definitely think it will. I think that, and I think that all comes down to, if you think of crypto, you think of Bitcoin, for example. It just simply comes down to scarcity. I mean, there's 21 million Bitcoin. It's a fixed supply. It will have value as collateral to preserve your savings, to preserve your wealth, and the US dollar will continue to decline. The United States dollar has declined 96.3% since the Federal Reserve was established in 2013-14 to establish price stability. So that decline will just continue.
Okay. Thank you so much, Robert. Do you want to summarize anything? Otherwise, is there any last thing that you want to add?
Well, I would say that my predictions for the next decade are here. And essentially, I think that DeFi adoption will jump 30%. 20 to 30%, and I think that Bitcoin will also increase significantly. I think you should expect that CeFi will increasingly fear DeFi and will, be expected to fight back.
Absolutely agree. Well, thank you so much, Robert. We're very happy to have you here. I will upload the video on YouTube, and if you can send me the slides, and then I can just share with everyone after as well.
Sure, that'll be great.
Awesome.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
All right, next up, we have Nicolás from Emurgo. And Nicolás is the CTO of Emurgo, a global blockchain solutions company and a founding entity of Cardano, in addition to the CEO of Brandmark, a traceability solution working on some of Israel's largest enterprises. So prior to Emurgo, Nicolás was the CEO and co-founder of a software development firm, which built 40 plus mobile solutions and worked with multiple companies in Silicon Valley. He also holds a position as council member of the Cardano Foundation. So yes, hi Nicolás, welcome.
Hi.
Do you want to share your slides or do you want to just chat?
I have some slides that I would like to share. One second. Share screen.
So Nicolás will talk about DeFi in Cardano, or DeFi on Cardano's platform.
Cool. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So my name is Nico Arqueros. I'm the CTO of Emurgo. And today I'm going to be talking to you about DeFi in Cardano, the UTXO way. So what is Cardano? Cardano is a third-generation blockchain that seeks to deliver more advanced features than any other protocol previously developed. So what do this mean in practice? That a third-generation blockchain basically is going to have safer smart contracts sustainability through decentralized governance. Also, we already have proof of stake, which is Ouroboros, and also we are implementing scalability solutions so we can build dApps that can scale up to millions of users. But the presentation is going to be specific about UTXO. And the last thing that I wanted to mention about Cardano is that Cardano is actually composed by 3 organizations. The Cardano Foundation, which is like a non-profit entity based in Switzerland that works with regulators and the community. Input Output, who they are like the organization that has researchers, developers, and they're actually the ones in charge of developing the protocol. And also there is a third organization called Emurgo, where I'm the CTO, and we are most working with like companies and bringing some specific business use cases to the platform. So this presentation is going to be a little bit technical, but not too deep. I just want to showcase why Cardano is like better, but sometimes to be better, you need to do something really different. And I want to explain this specific difference. So what is extended UTXO? So we have heard about UTXO because it's actually the accounting model that's used in Bitcoin. Ethereum and other blockchains use a different one that's accounting model. And this is really interesting because, for example, Bitcoin works more as a cashier in a supermarket. So for example, if you're going to buy something that's 95 cents, maybe you pay with $1 and they're going to give you change. So they're going to give you a coin back that's for 5 cents. Ethereum and other blockchains work differently. They work more like a bank account. So if you need to pay like 95 cents, you just transfer 95 cents. In practice, sounds more simple, but everything at the end is a trade-off. And extended UTXO stands that in Cardano, we grab the UTXO model from Bitcoin and we extended it so it can support smart contracts. But why? Like everything seems to be working fine in Ethereum, no? But the truth is that with extended UTXO model, we can have more a functional approach. And for the ones that code, you know that usually when you avoid a state and you have a functional approach, it's like better programming language and it's like less prone to bugs, mistakes, and so many other things. Also, UTXO-based smart contracts are like better suited for scalability paradigms that by avoiding global state, and also for sharding, which seems like is the way that multiple blockchains are going to be scaling. UTXO-based smart contracts are better for that because actually they can be parallelized, like the same way as a computer works when you have like multiple cores in your computer and you send different instructions to different cores in your computer. So UTXO's model is like a little bit more like this, and basically everything works with like state machines, which is like pretty simple and pretty clean. So for developing smart contracts and at the end, the UTXO holds most of the information and holds like the personal state. So a big difference is that usually in Ethereum smart contracts, the smart contract per se is going to be holding all the state for everything. But here, a big difference is that actually the UTXO holds most of the difference. And through action, this UTXO can like change. You are going to create a new UTXO, or it could be split in multiple UTXOs. And this allows to, as you can see in the screen, some very basic models of state machines where you can be changing between different states and even go back to the previous state. But the part that's really good is that you can do this with like thousands of users at the same time. So they can be holding different states in a really clean way for the developers. And basically, what is the information that the UTXO holds? So the UTXO is going to hold the tokens that the user has, a validated script hash, which basically is the hash of the smart contract, because in Cardano, we are not storing the smart contracts on chain, but actually the smart contracts are stored off chain, but we validate the smart contracts because the hash needs to match the one that was using the UTXO. Also, for last, a data script, a datum, which is like the information that's stored on chain, but we always try to minimize this to the bare minimum. So what is required to do a transaction? So we will need like the input of the UTXOs that you're going to use, pretty similar to Bitcoin. We also going to need the validator script, which is what I mentioned is actually the smart contract. Also, we're going to need a redeemer script, which basically are like the input. So for example, if you want to interact with a DEX, the redeemer script is going to be like for how much you want to exchange like sub tokens, and for which token do you want to change. And also the slot range, which basically means that if the network is congested, or if you want something to happen in the future, you can specify a slot range, so something could happen in the future. And basically, this is like the model that we extend the UTXOs, but like the specific programming language that we implemented for Cardano is called Plurus. And basically, smart Plurus consists of like pieces that run on chain and pieces that run off chain. But everything is developed in Haskell. For some of you, maybe you have heard that about Haskell. It is like really cool functional programming language, and we were able to develop Plurus TX, which works on top of Haskell, and this is a part that actually works on chain. And on the very bottom, you can see a little bit of how it looks like. And again, I would like to express that the really cool thing about this is that we work with the state machine, so we have clear change of machine states, and also it's a functional programming language, which is going to help a lot with everything related to bugs, and verifying that the smart contracts actually do what they're supposed to. We know that that could be a little bit like scary. So also we have another solution, which are for the ones that maybe they don't want to go too low for developing a smart contract. And this solution is called Malo, which is a domain-specific language. In other words, it's like instead of being able to build anything that you want, it's like a little bit more limited, but specializes in financial smart contracts and follows everything that has been done with Actus. So still you can do a lot with Malo. Malo, like Plurus, it looks like a little bit more like this. So you can see here the code. It looks like with cases, but even that sometimes is not that friendly. So you also can use this little thing called Blockly. So it's like pretty nice because actually you can put like block to create a smart contract. And the really nice thing here is that you even have a static analysis. So this could help you automatically telling you what things could be wrong. If you were creating some things that maybe the code is not going to be able to reach out to that specific part of the code, or for example, if you are using variables that actually you don't use them again. It's pretty nice, and as smart contracts, you can actually create something that's actually secure in just less than an hour. So it's like quite amazing. And I wanted to keep it short because mostly I wanted to answer questions. And if you want to know more about Cardano, I will highly recommend you to go to Cardano.org for more information.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So let me ask some questions that is over here. Can Cardano work with any other oracles or any oracles?
So right now we are working with different oracle providers. As I mentioned, the way that Cardano works is through UTXOs. So in our specific case, you need to be able to expand a UTXO to confirm it. So sometimes oracles will have to create like multiple UTXOs, but we can work with like most of like the oracles out there.
Are they
and like the
interoperable?
last thing, for example, we have different types of oracles.
Sorry, continue.
So for example, we have, for example, in Coinbase, we have signed data. So you actually don't need like more of like an advanced solution, like for example, Chainlink to like read information from Coinbase, because they're already giving you like the information that's signed. So you can verify that already with smart contracts in Cardano. And this is like quite good because you can have like faster information and cheaper, because right now something that we see in Ethereum is that gas fees are super high. So that's why we are like doing some things on chain and other things off chain, so we can speed up the process and also make it cheaper.
That's a very good jump to the next question. Is that I was under the impression that Cardano is an ETH killer and gas fees is a big problem now. How will Cardano tap on this opportunity?
Oh yeah, that's like a nice introduction for that question. So basically, we are avoiding most of like the unnecessary operations in the chain. For example, as I mentioned, for example, you are not going to be having to interact with that many smart contracts, because also instead what you can do is like verify that some information was actually signed by some specific like private key through the usage of its public key. And also because we are like working with scalability solutions that are like using sharding, which is also what other blockchains are aiming to use. And for example, Ethereum is working in that. But the problem that they could have is that they still have a model that uses like global state. So it's going to be like really tricky to have something that's centralized but running like multiple different parallel blockchains. And that's why the UTXO way of smart contracts is really interesting, because something that's parallelizable through sharding also should be parallelizable in the smart contract level.
DeFi is quite distributed. DeFi has a lot of different segments. What do you think is the biggest DeFi use case where UTXO is the most value add that adds value to that sector in DeFi?
Cool. So basically, I think right now there is a lot of like proof of concept, and even like 8 years, like 7 years ago, Ethereum was a proof of concept. But as we are building and testing like new different ways to utilize this technology, we realize that sometimes the technical part is not like good enough. So in Cardano, UTXO doesn't limit the applications that you can do, but actually the UTXO is like a better way to play nice with other technologies that we see are required for a blockchain to scale up. And personally, I really like everything that's mostly related not so much to the current usage of DeFi, but actually more about like what I can see in like a second level, which is for like banking the unbanked, and also fully banked the semi-bank. And but right now that's like really tricky, because for example, if we're going to be using a stablecoin like DAI, and you want to move from dollars to DAI, you're going to be paying like 12% just to buy DAI. So it's like not actually practical for people. So there are like a lot of like different problems that we need to solve as an industry, so people can like jump on chain and off chain quite easily and without spending money, because actually unbanked people don't have that much extra money to like be spending in like fees. That's actually what they're trying to avoid.
Agree. So a question, a personal view of you, is DeFi a bubble?
So I think like sadly, most of the technologies sometimes they start like getting like too hot and they turn to a bubble. But for example, we have the bubble in the 2000s about like all the tech companies, but then we saw that, oh, Amazon was a bubble at that point. Yes, at that point was a bubble, but now even their value and the price in the stock market is like even higher than at the top of that bubble. So it depends where you are. Sometimes things get like really hot quite easily, but I think in the long term, we definitely are going to be creating a lot of value.
Awesome. One last question. Oops. Will Cardano launch their version of Just Swap, or what do you think of Tron's play?
So I hear the first part. The second part was what I think about which specific
Tron.
project. Tron. I don't know much about Tron. To be honest, I know that Justin is like a huge personality, and that's super interesting. But I sadly don't know much about that. About like what we are going to have something like similar to Uniswap. Definitely, we are going to have like
Uniswap. I think it's Just Swap.
Oh, Just Swap. Oh, I don't know Just Swap.
I don't know too.
But if it's like a decentralized exchange that using AMM, which is like automatic market makers, definitely we're going to have a few in Cardano, and we have multiple organizations working on multiple proposals. So actually, if you have multiple dexes, then you're going to also have like dex aggregators. So you can expect to see most of the same applications that you see in Ethereum and other blockchains in Cardano, but they're going to be built in a different way.
Are they similar? Are they the same companies that are looking to expand to new layer one solutions, or are they completely new companies?
So
Those that's really
yeah, that's a really good question. So it's actually like a mix of companies. So we have a fair amount of companies that are like, they have like this huge problem with the gas fees, and they actually, their solutions cannot be used that much, although their valuations are like pretty big. So, but they're always like actually looking for making the project work. So they are looking at alternatives. And in Cardano, we already have a pretty fair amount of projects that are like going to be like supporting Cardano.
Awesome. Okay, so one last question by the person here. If I am a project wanting to work with Cardano, what can I do?
Cool. So you have like multiple ways to interact with Cardano. So for example, right now we have, you can go to Emurgo to support. It's like similar to Consensus. Also, you can go for a grant from the Cardano Foundation, and the Cardano Foundation is putting RFP about different topics where you can get a grant, or actually you can get a grant from the community. Right now, there is a project called Project Catalyst that is going to close in 2 more days, and it's giving away in total like up to $250,000. And this is like other people that you need to address. And for this latest one is like the community. So for that, for us, it's super important sustainability, and we do this through like multiple options. So if like for some reason you like Emurgo, or even if you also like the Cardano Foundation, you can go directly to the community for support, and actually they can give you ADA from like the treasury system.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Nico, and thank you. Everyone
you.
follow Nico, and speak soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So for everyone else that's here, thank you so much for joining us. I think I've answered more or less the questions. I will just consolidate them and put them on Twitter to be answering them. Moving on. So just to give you a summary of what's next. So economics design, what we do education, we do research, like academic research, and we do consulting on developing all these kind of cool economic systems. That's what we do. And if you're interested in more of these kind of webinars, you can continue to follow Block Life Asia, because they're going to continue developing new cool webinars that's going to come very soon. So follow them on Twitter and figure out and follow them on whatever that new announcements will be up. Whereas on economics design, we have weekly podcasts on YouTube, and we have a lot of educational classes, courses, and a lot of other online research stuff and education stuff if you want to learn more things. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been 3 sessions, and I know some of you are here for all 3 sessions. I really, really want to thank you, because that has been absolutely amazing, and we really appreciate your time staying with us for 2 hours. Thank you so much, and thank you for asking all the questions. If you have anything else, just follow us on Twitter, ask us on Twitter, ping us on Twitter, ping us on YouTube, or emails and whatever other social channels that we have. Thank you so much, and see you soon. Bye. I